Let me just start off by saying I love eating Lunchables as an adult, okay? I know it's not cool, it's not socially acceptable, but I look like an absolute giant holding those little tiny Ritz cookie sandwiches. Don't even get me started on that tiny little pepperoni pizza. On a side note, I can't actually believe that there was a time and a place where a tiny little Lunchable snack pack could actually fill me up. I would probably have to eat like 20 of these just to chase the hunger away. But anyways, enough talk about Lunchables. Honestly, I feel like I talk about them so often that some people may get the impression that this channel is like secretly sponsored by Lunchables, but that's not the case. Could you imagine being sponsored by them though? You would essentially be set for life. Anyways, let's get serious here for a second. As you guys can tell, I'm hungry, okay? When I usually start off the intro with something that's related to food, it's just because I haven't eaten in like 20 hours. So let's get straight into today's video. So I actually did want to kind of touch on a subject that isn't necessarily groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something worth mentioning. So initially, most of us had just assumed that McFarlane was going to lose a license at the end of 2025, and then 2026 was going to be the time frame when Mattel was supposed to be taking over the DC license. Now, we don't have any exact dates according to all of the different websites that I visited, including Toy News International, by the way, great website. If you guys haven't checked them out recently, I highly suggest you guys do so. But they wrote an entire article about how essentially we were a little bit off on the time frame. Apparently, the action figure license is supposed to pass on somewhere between the lines of late 2026 going on to early 2027. As I said, the exact dates or the exact details have not been made public, so I'm going to assume that either the whole agreement is still being finalized or it's just not something that they relate to the consumer, because there may be a little bit of overlapping, there may be some crossing over, and so they don't want to set like an exact time frame, or I should say an exact date, to where like McFarlane can no longer produce action figures based on the DC universe. I'm assuming that if there's a delay in shipping or in production, that maybe they're given a little bit of leeway. Like there could potentially be like DC multiverse action figures hitting from McFarlane and Mattel at the same time, but that's only because of, you know, problems with distribution and things along those lines. Now, there are other content creators out there that are claiming that 2027 is the official date for when Mattel finally takes over for the DC license as a whole, which is kind of interesting. It feels like that time frame continues to get pushed back. I'm not exactly sure why. If you're asking me, and well, nobody is really asking me, but I'll tell you guys anyways, I would honestly rather not know the exact time frame for when McFarlane loses the DC license, because it's kind of like this overwhelming dread that is setting into the DC community as a whole. And yes, there are people out there that just don't collect DC collectibles from McFarlane, but there are those people that just collect DC collectibles in general. Regardless of who the manufacturer is, they're always going to support DC as a whole. But it just feels weird because a lot of people are kind of preparing themselves to either get rid of their DC action figures from McFarlane or preparing that change, that shift. Right, like there may be some people that are starting to jump off of the McFarlane bandwagon just for the sake of preparing themselves for Mattel. And unfortunately, there's no exact date of when McFarlane is going to actually lose the DC license. I suppose we're just going to have to play it by ear. Now, I will try to keep you guys updated if there's any new news or any announcement regarding the official date of when the transfer is going to happen. I will definitely let you guys know, so make sure to stick around, stay tuned. I also wanted to touch a little bit on the Immortal Champions Retro Hellboy action figure. This is coming to us from Boss Studios. If you guys are not familiar with Boss Studios, they actually just recently released a little mini wave for the Hellboy universe. However, that one I think is based on more modern representations of Hellboy. Not to mention, it's actually closer to the 1/12 scale. It has much better articulation, better sculpt work all around, and it did come with at least a decent array of accessories. They would later offer like a little accessory pack for an extra $20. I think grand total you were paying about $80 for the Hellboy. He would come with like some extra soft goods, some extra weaponry, extra head sculpts, things of that nature. Now in this particular case, you're looking at a Hellboy action figure that, as I mentioned, is a retro style figure. It's more based on some of his comic book appearances in the 80s. The size is a huge difference as well here. The original, or the Hellboy that they released about a couple of months ago, is about 7.5 inches. This Hellboy is only 5.5. Also, the price point is completely different. This Hellboy is going for about $30, whereas in the previously mentioned Hellboy is going for about $60. So there's a huge difference in quality. There's a huge difference in articulation, sculpt work. The original one had much higher articulation points. This one only has about 27. Now, having said that, still 27 points of articulation for a retro style action figure is actually really good. There are definitely no butterfly joints. It appears that it's a single hinge or a single articulation point at the elbow. There doesn't appear to be anything at the mid-torso either. So as I mentioned, it's a much simpler rendition, a much simpler take on Hellboy as a character. He's like very bubbly. I'm not sure if there's ever been like a Hellboy animated series, but this is kind of what I would think of, at least in my mental image, if they ran Hellboy through like some sort of animated filter. He's very bubbly. He's kind of chunky in certain areas. He's very stylized, and I think this is going to be something that appeals to at least a decent amount of people. Not to mention, it's just way more affordable if you just want Hellboy represented in your action figure collection. If you don't care about scaling, if you don't care about like sculpt work and, you know, extra points of articulation, if you just want a good, solid, affordable Hellboy, I think this is a great option for you. However, as you guys can see in the promotional images, he's definitely going to lack that crazy articulation. He's not going to be able to get into any crazy dynamic poses. And he also doesn't come with a lot of accessories. He comes with a pistol and a sword. That's it. No extra hands, no extra head sculpts. The paint deco is also very simplistic. Like, there's no extra shade work. There's like not a lot of texturing around the muscles. There's no like veins popping out. There's absolutely no definition to this figure. But again, it just depends on what you want from a Hellboy collectible. If you want something that's like top notch, you're probably waiting on the original Boss Studios Hellboy, or you're picking up something from like, I think Mezco did their version not so long ago. This is overall just a more simplistic take on Hellboy if you just don't want to break the bank. And it's kind of interesting because I don't quite remember a time when we've had an affordable Hellboy. It feels like everybody that has picked up the license or the franchise tends to mark up their figures by quite a bit. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Is the licensing really expensive? Or do they have to produce less of them because there isn't like a huge fan base and they have to pay extra to like the factories and whatnot? I'm not 100% sure exactly what's going on, but it feels like every time there's a new Hellboy action figure or collectible, it's very expensive and you really have to pay a premium. So it's nice to see something like this. It's also worth mentioning that it's never like the big companies picking up Hellboy. As far as I can remember, maybe there has been one in the past, but it's not like NECA is manufacturing Hellboy action figures, or McFarlane or Hasbro, or you know, Jazzwares or Mattel. Like, I think if they picked up the license and made a Hellboy, it would be very affordable. It would have a decent array of accessories, articulation, all of those great things that you expect. But because it's a much smaller manufacturer, they just don't have the connections, they don't have the resources, and so usually there's quite a bit of a markup with Hellboy action figures. So if you guys are interested in picking this up, it will retail for $29.99 and it is set to release sometime in the third quarter of 2026. I will say it definitely opens up the possibilities in the future for seeing more characters based in the Hellboy universe in this type of retro style. Kind of more simplistic takes on the characters, maybe less accessories, less articulation, but as I mentioned before, just a much more affordable price point. I feel like there's a huge demand for this, and the fan base for Hellboy I think has been expanding and growing over the past few years, especially with a lot of the live action adaptations and some great comic book runs here and there. It's definitely a very fun an exciting time for DC collectors, even though I think it's kind of the end of an era very soon. But at least it's exciting to think that there is a new manufacturer that's going to give us like a brand new, fresh perspective, and then more Hellboy collectibles, right? We can never say no to that. By the way, I'm aware that Mattel has already acquired the license to the DC universe in the past, but I'm trying to be optimistic here. I'm trying to be positive. I'm actually going to expect Mattel to learn from their mistakes, and honestly, even learn from some of the mistakes that McFarlane has made along the way. I almost feel like it's a good thing that at one point they held the DC license and then lost it, because I definitely feel like it's a learning process. And I feel like they're going to just come out of the gates with absolute bangers. I think they're going to just completely surprise us. As I said, I'm trying to be optimistic here. Whether they can necessarily match McFarlane's effort level, I'm not 100% sure. Regardless of what you think about McFarlane as a manufacturer, and I know there are a lot of people out there that absolutely despise him, but he went all out. Like, I don't think that, especially at the beginning, I don't think he was pulling punches. He was really giving us some great action figures with a ton of different accessories. And when he started doing like really innovative, creative stuff, like soft wired capes, stuff that Hasbro hasn't done, and they've had licenses for the Star Wars universe and the Marvel universe for like years now, probably over a decade, or at least close to a decade. And McFarlane did it like year 2 of having the DC license. He's done a ton of different vehicles. I mean, he really pushed the envelope, and I'm hoping that Mattel actually follows suit. Hopefully they follow the same blueprint, they follow in the steps, and they kind of nail it, and they perfect what McFarlane kind of started at the very beginning. But only time will tell. I'm kind of curious to see what everybody has to say down below in the comment section. Let me know, are you guys excited for Mattel to take over? Do you want McFarlane to hold on to the license just a little bit longer for you to be able to complete some teams, or are you ready for a brand new change? Do you want to see more affordable Hellboy action figures in the future? Let me know. I'm genuinely curious. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, if you guys enjoyed this type of rambling action figure content, make sure to stay tuned. We do it pretty consistently. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the hobby. Pose your action figures. Play around with them. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.